academic writing and the research paper. So analysis, sources, and documentation. So what I'm going to do in this PowerPoint basically is talk about synthesizing our documentation, our research, and our academic writing so we can write our research paper. Some conventions of academic writing, and like all the writing that we do, we want to present a clearly stated thesis. Generally speaking, it's in your introductory paragraph. And what you want to do in your paper is to provide evidence that supports your thesis. You want to analyze meaning, you want to infer assumptions, you want to synthesize text with your own views. Academic writers do not merely summarize, they read and write critically. They also assume an educated audience. Additionally, they acknowledge the use of sources both with in-text citations and with works cited, and in our case in the MLA format. So in other words, the difficult thing relative to writing a research paper is how do I take my research and make it seamless with what I am writing. In other words, people a lot of times they'll write a paper, and let's say they're writing a paper on bison in the 17th century, and they're writing fine and everything's moving along, and then they want to put some academic writing in to back up their claims. The problem is a lot of times it looks stilted or it looks like it's thrown in, and the challenge is to make it so it flows within what you have written that are your own words. It's also important to remember, speaking of your own words, that if you do use someone else's information, that you need to make sure that you do cite it and that it does appear in your works cited page. So one way that you can employ other people's research is by responding to a text. So you can agree with and extend an author's ideas, so you can provide additional examples, right? So you can say, here's what this person said, I agree with it, and here's some more examples of what they're saying. You can agree with the author on some points and disagree with others, or you can disagree with the author on one or more key points. So you can kind of use them as a foil to make your own point. Also, you can just judge the overall effectiveness of their work to help make your argument. You talk about working with evidence, using sources. You have to identify, once again, the sources of all borrowed information and ideas. So if it's not yours, you have to make certain that you cite it. That means indicating where the material can be found. You need to mark direct quotations, and you need to take care to express all paraphrases and summaries in your own words. You also need to list sources. In our case, at the end of the paper, you need a works cited page. If you need help, one reference among many is if you look in the book, the Brief Bedford Reader, page 514 or so, there is a sample research paper, and at the end of that is a works cited page. It should look like that. The one thing to remember, you should recognize common knowledge. If it's common knowledge, you don't need to quote the source. Now, relative to in-text citations and works cited, in-text citation merely acknowledges within the text, here is something that I took from someone else. So let's say the author of the quote that you took, name is Brown. Within your works cited page, there needs to be Brown, comma, whatever Brown's name is, and then the information that follows relative to what that author has written. The point that I'm making is for every citation, if the citation says Brown within the text, then there better be a Brown in the works cited. So it should match up. The rationale is that within the text, here's the thing that I took from this other author. I can go to the works cited, and if I'm a curious person or I am a scholar, I can go and I can look, did you accurately portray what that person said? Can I read more about it? Can I verify that this is an actual source? Of course, what we want to avoid is plagiarism, and plagiarism is using the work of others without acknowledgement. Another way to say it, it's really stealing. It can be from direct quotations or from paraphrased material. It's academic dishonesty, and In some cases, well, in all cases, but in some cases, it's illegal enough for people to sue. It also ensures that no learning is taking place. So if you go to do your research paper and you just pull from other people's material, you may or may not succeed in getting a grade on your paper, but you also succeeded in learning nothing. We talked already about evaluating sources, but it's important enough to discuss again. You want to determine the purpose and audience of the writer who created the source. Is the source relevant to what you're doing? Does the author have credentials or bias? Is there actual evidence rather than opinion? You also want to discuss currency. How old is the work? Has new evidence been brought to life or light that makes that evidence obsolete? And then we talked about primary and secondary sources, but you want to note if it is a primary or a secondary source. Once again, primary sources are works by people who conducted interviews, witnessed events firsthand, surveys. Secondary sources, of course, present and analyze the information in primary sources, include history reviews, surveys of field, etc. Evaluating internet sources, and once again, I've been through this, but what's the origin? Can the author be identified? Who created the website? When did this happen? How current is the source? All this good stuff. And the reason I bring this up is not just to discuss the evaluation part of it again, but so you can accurately cite the sources within your works cited portion of your paper. Once again, when you synthesize sources, in research writing, your view should predominate over your sources. In other words, here is what I think, right? And then you decide which sources to use, how to treat them, what conclusions to draw from them in order to test and support your thesis. There are examples as noted in the book, page 69, 56 to 88, 70 to 88, all these things discussed this more in depth. What I'll say about it is this. You need to be the person driving the car. The car in this case being your research paper. And what you do is you use information from other people to bolster your argument. Once again, revision, rewriting is important. It's extra important in the research paper because it's a longer paper. It's the most important paper we're going to write this semester. Academic writing, probably even more so than stuff like fiction. Well, at least equally so. It's important to revise. Ideally, you have an initial plan. You research your ideas, and you begin to write while incorporating your research. That's the start. I will say it's not always easy. It's not something a person does every day, generally speaking. So you should be prepared to be a little bit frustrated, particularly at the outset. It's important to know most serious academic writers, people that write like for academic books and such, produce multiple drafts until they're happy with what they have written.